CGI has enabled filmmakers to show us wonders beyond imagination. Giant monsters, alien worlds, a young Samuel L. Jackson who still kind of runs like a 70-year-old man. Nothing is impossible. But what if we told you there was a sort of giant movie studio, but without green screens or motion capture? A kind of real-life special effect. Wild, huh? Experts call it Planet Earth. Yeah, that's right. Sometimes the most spectacular locations don't need millions of dollars in processing power. They're already here. Hold tight as we explore some real locations that you could have sworn were special effects. At this point, even casual moviegoers know two things about Dune: big worm and lots of sand. And while the big worms might have been CGI, the sand was very real. Director Denis Villeneuve wanted appropriately grand vistas for his sci-fi epic, so for the exterior desert scenes, the crew traveled to Jordan and the United Arab Emirates. The punishing heat reached highs of 120 degrees Fahrenheit, and Jason Momoa called the shoot one of the most taxing things he's ever had to do as an actor. Now, of course, the crew did need to add effects in post-production. But to combine them with the real locations as seamlessly as possible, VFX supervisor Paul Lambert masterminded a new technique called sand screen, literally painting his green screens brown. Interestingly, however, actor Timothée Chalamet is a 100% CGI creation. Has been ever since Call Me By Your Name. Seriously, Google it. The James Bond series is famous for exotic locations and huge over-the-top villain hideouts, and the latest entry, No Time to Die, combined both in spectacular fashion. Chief bad guy Safin's lair was added in post-production, but the actual location of the base was real. It needed to be remote while also allowing for some impressive beauty shots, so the filmmakers opted for the island of Kalsoy, one of the Faroe Islands off the coast of Denmark. But believe it or not, none of the actors ever visited Kalsoy. Not even Daniel Craig. This was down to logistical issues, as filming with actors would have required a much bigger crew, and the island has no hotel and only one ferry. Come on, you think they're gonna put James Bond in a tent? Avengers Infinity War was a big movie, and it used a lot of locations. You probably already knew that they shot in the US and the UK, but there is one location that you probably assumed was CGI, because the only character in it is CGI. At the climax of the movie, Thanos retires to a lush green planet to pick flowers and make soup. And while Thanos is of course a motion capture creation, for the location itself, Marvel used the Banoi rice terraces in the Philippines, a UNESCO World Heritage Site sometimes referred to as the eighth wonder of the world. However, Josh Brolin never went to the location, and in fact, neither did the Russo brothers. Marvel used a production studio based in Thailand to get the footage, and then added everything else in post-production.
I know you have found something.
The magic of movies, folks. These days, everybody is familiar with the landscapes of New Zealand. From the Hobbit trilogy to Hunt for the Wilder People, even if you haven't visited the island nation, you probably recognize its stunning countryside. But when The Lord of the Rings first shot there, it was a big deal. The wider world hadn't been exposed to New Zealand, and that trilogy was an ideal showcase. Every location in Middle-earth, from Hobbiton to Mordor, was filmed in New Zealand over the course of a mammoth 18-month shoot. The footage was of course augmented with CGI, but the filmmakers opted to build as many practical sets as possible. They actually built Hobbiton in its entirety. And while it was torn down after the shoot, it was rebuilt for the Hobbit trilogy. In fact, it's still there today. Star Wars is famous for revolutionizing the field of movie special effects, but much of the magic of the series came from its use of real locations. You probably already know that the Tatooine scenes from the original trilogy were shot in Tunisia, with many of the structures, including Obi-Wan's house, remaining as tourist attractions. Even the famously CGI-heavy prequel trilogy used real locations. For example, Regia di Caserta in Italy doubled for the planet Naboo. But did you know that Ahch-To, Luke's hideout from the sequel trilogy, was a real place? It's called Skellig Michael, an island off the coast of Ireland. A UNESCO World Heritage Site full of endangered species, the island's stunning terrain made it very difficult to shoot there, and the bad weather didn't help. The porgs were apparently pretty hostile too. When making Mad Max Fury Road, George Miller originally intended to shoot in the same locations he used for his original trilogy. the Broken Hill region in New South Wales, Australia. But, ironically, after a few years of unusually heavy rain, the area was looking too lush and green to double as a post-apocalyptic wasteland. Instead, Miller and his crew shot in Namibia on the West African coast. But wanting to keep things looking gritty and tactile, Miller avoided digital trickery wherever possible. So, while the Citadel was a mixture of practical sets and CGI, the deserts were brutally real. And though you might have expected heat to be an issue, the shoot took place during winter, so the actors were more likely to complain about the cold. Batman tends to spend most of his time in Gotham City, but Bruce Wayne gets a bit more freedom to travel. And in Christopher Nolan's Batman Begins, he finds his way to some pretty stunning icy locations while traveling the world picking fights. These locations, which took fans' breath away when the movie came out, were in Iceland. Oh boy, I'm gonna have to pronounce some Icelandic words. Okay, Nolan and his crew decided to shoot near Svinafellsjökull, an outcrop of the country's largest glacier, Vatnajökull. But when they first arrived, believe it or not, there wasn't any snow. So they had to spend 4 days covering the location with fake stuff. Even more worryingly, local experts warned that the frozen lake where Christian Bale and Liam Neeson have their sword fight could melt any day. So Nolan decided to shoot that scene ahead of schedule. It all turned out okay, of course, although Bale did say they heard a few pretty loud cracks. After all that difficulty with fake snow and melting lakes, you wouldn't necessarily have expected Christopher Nolan to hurry back to Iceland. But you'd be wrong. For Interstellar, he decided to return to the very same glacier. And hey, sure, if your characters are traveling to an ice planet, it's a solid choice. In fact, Nolan is far from the only filmmaker to see the appeal of Iceland's alien landscapes. You may also remember them from the prologue of Prometheus, the torpedo defusing scene from Star Trek Into Darkness, and Starkiller Base from Star Wars The Force Awakens. Oh, and the beginning of Star Wars Rogue One. And the climax of Captain America Civil War. Look, we could go on.
I could do this all day.
But we won't. We're sorry to be the ones to tell you this, but Hogwarts isn't a real place. Sorry, we'll just give you a moment for that to sink in. Of course, when making the Harry Potter movies, this meant that the filmmakers had to find a location to represent Hogwarts. And for the first 2 movies, the exterior of the castle was portrayed by Alnwick Castle in Northumberland, England. The castle is nearly 1,000 years old and welcomes nearly 1 million visitors every year. You can even learn to ride a broomstick there. And Harry Potter isn't its only claim to fame. It was also used as a location for Downton Abbey. Downton Abbey, if you haven't heard of it, is a reality show about how English people live today. It's wild. Okay, so you're probably aware that Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade was made before the widespread use of CGI. So maybe you thought that incredible final location of the Holy Grail was a matte painting or something. But you would be wrong. The temple was actually a real place in the ancient city of Petra in Jordan. Voted one of the 7 new wonders of the world in 2007, Petra is one of the oldest cities in the world, thought to have been established around 312 BC. Interestingly, Steven Spielberg was initially refused permission to shoot in Petra. But after Formula One world champion Sir Jackie Stewart met the director and heard about his troubles, he made a personal introduction to the King of Jordan, who changed his mind and granted them permission to film. Turns out, not even Spielberg is all-powerful.